think we're ready? Let's see. Yeah, good. Okay. Hey, welcome to this History Chats for this afternoon here. The first week in September with a brand new theme. Yeah, so we're going to get started here with the Cutler Post Memorial Statue in about 5 minutes. As always, we're just going to leave the stream open for a little bit and just kind of hang out for a second. If you're watching this after the fact, the recording, if you're not watching this at nearly 12:30 here, September 2nd, feel free to just skip ahead a little bit. It'll be about 5 minutes and then we'll get into the history. Okay. Just checking some stuff here. Go. Yeah, well, thanks for people for watching. Hopefully this is a interesting topic to talk about. I know I'm excited to be able to share the story here. This is a fun, oddly controversial one. We're talking about memorials and markers and statues and stuff that we memorialize the past. And this is one of those that had a bit of a backlash about, but we'll get into that later. In the meantime, I'm just going to make sure I have the chat pulled up here, just in case anybody wants to say hello. Feel free to do so. By the way, if you have any questions or comments at any point, we can. I'll talk about those later, address them. So if you're watching this live and you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to put those in there, and yeah, see what we can do about them later. Let's see, it's under. Here we are. Great. I guess while we're waiting, get through some of the standard stuff here. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor, Yankee Bookstore, for making it possible for us to do this. Still put the wrong. Well, History Speaks as well, even though this is History Chats. Thanks to them for our sponsor of this year's programming. Yeah. Oh, here's a fun transition. If you're interested in this story, we're going to touch on, I'm going to try not to step on it too much, but later in this month, actually, just coming up in a couple weeks, we're going to be talking about the Grand Army of the Republic. Professor Brett Barker from the University, Stevens Point, University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, both at Stevens Point and the whole, at WASA. Anyway, he is going to be coming back and talking once again about some Civil War era stuff. And he's going to be talking about kind of not during the war, but after the war, what happened to all the Union veterans, which is a very interesting story. And you will maybe recognize this picture from the presentation today. But yeah, that'll be coming up on September 18th. So that's a Saturday. And we will be at 2 p.m. Right here on Facebook or YouTube Live. But again, thanks to our sponsors and, of course, to all of our members that make it possible for us to do this. As we always say, it's a great opportunity if you're interested in local history and you enjoy the sort of stuff we do, programs, exhibits, and you're not already a member. It's a great opportunity to support local history and also get some stuff out of it. Get our Wanigan newsletter. We are just putting up our final touches to get that out coming soon for our fall issue. And of course, you get some tickets to the Yawkey House, which is now once again open for tours. So yeah, just something if you're interested in supporting, and you can, that's a good way to do it. Anyway, it's about 12:30 somehow. So I think we're just gonna jump right in then. Yeah. Let's see here. Hey, here we are. Put that a little bit. Well, welcome. I'm just gonna take this off. Today we are talking about, as you can see, the Cutler Post Memorial Statue, which is very iconic and one of it is the oldest statue of its kind on the courthouse grounds. And it is, it's one of the most controversial. This is the controversial statue, if you could believe it. But we'll get to that later. I'm going to try to keep that anticipation of what could the controversy be. We'll talk about that in a bit. But first, let's talk about the statue itself. So it is a granite statue. It stands at a towers over you at 22 feet tall. It's made out of granite, so it's pretty heavy. I found one source that suggested it was about 4,500 pounds, which is not surprising considering the materials they made out of. And of course, from Marathon County, we got to have the polished red granite, as well as some unpolished stuff too. It was designed by Alexander Robertson, as I understand it. He was commissioned by people to put this together. It cost they ended up raising the sum that I could find was not less than $3,000. So it was a little north of 2,000, somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000, which in the 1880s was a lot of money, of course. And Robertson, who was I think he was like the superintendent of the early granite companies that were quarrying out the granite here, which is obviously one of the big resources that we have here in Marathon County, natural resources. He designed and built this. The statue itself, by the way, which is 7.5 feet tall on the top, that was separate. The rest of the statue was delivered, as we'll talk about, in 1886 when it was completed. Statue took a little bit more time. Again, the sources here, I'm going to keep coming back to this theme. It's a long time ago, and there's a lot of unsure information out there that gets repeated. So I'm trying to be tactful in telling the story without saying this is the definitive truth, because even in the last couple days putting this together, I've kind of gone back and forth on some stuff. But I've seen some sources that suggest that, let's see, what was his name? Chris Young, I think his name was? Yeah, Chris Young, who was apparently also the police chief at the time, was the sculptor of the statue at the top, which was designed to be sort of an anonymous soldier, but may have been modeled after the actual individual Louis Bloch, perhaps. But yeah, that's the statue. And it was on the courthouse grounds. It's interesting because if you think about the statue today, if you're walking past it, obviously things have changed a little bit since, these days. Downtown Wausau looks a little different, but it's still there. If you're walking past the courthouse, you can still see this out there. And I think it'd be difficult because nothing on this actually says this is Civil War, which is what this is in remembrance of. Unless you know, obviously, if you're familiar with the military uniform, you might be able to guess based off of the soldier at the top. But the rest of the statue, there's nothing says like Civil War veterans. In fact, here's all the things that it says. On this plaque in here, kind of between the pillars, it says, "A grateful people's token of remembering." And then it's 1886, which is the year that it was supposed to be finished. And then up at the top here, we've got FCL, single letters. Now, this actually stands for Fraternity, Charity, and Loyalty, which is the tenets of the Grand Army of the Republic, the Civil War Veterans Group, which then at the bottom, Cutler Post. That was the name of our veterans group here. So before we get to them, let's just kind of step back a little bit and talk about Marathon County and the Civil War in general, the U.S. Civil War, right? When war was declared, apparently we found out because there was a fife and a drummer who announced it to the public in Wausau, and that was how we knew we're at war. The South had seceded from the Union, and we got to, bring them back into the fold. And so in response, apparently the first group that enlisted, that joined up, Leander Swope, Swappy. I'm not sure how you'd pronounce that. I'm never really sure how to go back on some of these names, but I'm going to say Swope. He joined up. He was actually from, let's see here, wrote it down, Pine River, which is now in Lincoln County. But at the time, in 1861, there was no Lincoln County. It was just the northern part of Marathon County. We hadn't separated that out yet. But he comes down to Wausau and joins up with these 5 gentlemen, and they go down to Portage, where they enlist to fight in the Union Army. And they're not going to be alone over the course. This is the first kind of group. We didn't really have like a militia company here like we would after the war. like the Company G of the National Guard, Wisconsin National Guard. That's not something that we had. Instead, we had just some individuals, and so it was more of an individual things who, people who joined up, volunteered, maybe were drafted, whatever the situation might be. Now I found this, and again, I'm gonna qualify this by saying this is what this source says. But it says that an estimated 286 men from Marathon County would end up serving during the course of those years, from 1861 to 1865 during the Civil War, which is about, they estimated, and that number is probably good, but it's this number that I'm not sure about, the 705 eligible men, which could be right. They estimated it's about 40%, which isn't bad. That's probably more or less what we're looking at, which is a lot, and that goes to show how involved the general public was. Like over the course of 4 years, even up here in this pioneering little lumber town, still probably mistaken for Big Bull Falls, hadn't been recognized as Wausau, not that far away from those days, and still 40% of, I think like 20% of the total people came from Wausau, and another 20% from the rest of the county. So that's a lot of people. Now you add to this the fact that the population after the war, these guys come home. Not all of them. Some of them, don't make it, but many of the veterans who left end up coming back. But you also see just the population in general. And if we look at like the Civil War, you can see it kind of as a depressed period here. This is the total population based off of the Wisconsin and U.S. censuses from 1850 to 1885. And during that time, you can see that, we stay about a little under 500, and then around 1860 we jump a little bit, and then it kind of stays steady, and then the war is over, and then all of a sudden we have this huge increase where we go from essentially 3,000 to almost 30,000 in the course of, what is that, 20, 25 years? 20 years? Yeah. So that's a lot of people coming here. Now, a lot of those are immigrants, people from, German-speaking parts of Europe, Norwegians, Hungarians, Polish, Irish. But there's also a lot of Americans who, after the war is over, decide, particularly in the western part of the county, you have communities like Unity and Colby and Abbotsford that are settled because of the railroad. And that attracts a lot of the veterans who are looking, in service of their country. Now they're going to settle down and become farmers or businessmen or whatever they're going to do. And they come up here for that. So as a result, there is a lot of people in the county, and specifically in Wausau, who served, over the course of after the postbellum era, after the war is over. And that leads us to these guys. This is the Lysander Cutler Post of the Grand Army of the Republic. This is post number 55. And again, I'm gonna qualify this by saying I don't know if this is 1890 or 1900. I've seen some different things, but apparently it's the 4th of July. Most frequently, I've seen it as 1890, and that wouldn't be too far off, as far as I can tell. But it could be a little later. Either way, this is the Grand Army of the Republic chapter here. So what is the Grand Army of the Republic? Again, I'm going to try not to step too much on Brett Barker's talk coming up in a couple days here on the 18th, because he's going to be talking about the Grand Army of the Republic and its influence in the wider sense. But just the basics here. After the war is over, there's a little bit of precedent. There's groups like the Society of Cincinnatus after the Revolutionary War. There was a brief Mexican-American conflict that was a bunch of veterans then created the Aztec Club. And now we have another sort of support group, fraternal organization that's established by the veterans of the U.S. Army. It starts in Springfield, Illinois in 1866. And within by the end of the year, most of the other Union states and even some of the former Confederate states had chapters of the GAR, such as Wisconsin. Now, over the course of the 1870s, the interest in this at the local level as well as a wider level, and I should say in 1869 is the time that apparently Wausau's chapter got started. At that point, they weren't 55. I think they were 83, post 83. Although they didn't really use posts in the same way they're going to. There's a reorganization coming. But they start in 1869, about there, and then by 1871 they disband. And that was very common over the course of the wider story of this organization. There's a declining membership in the 1870s, and then a revival in the 1880s, and particularly like 81, 82, there's this new sort of reinvigoration. More people are joining up, and you have this new sort of post format that really takes off. And I guess I wrote that, I realized that they did have posts before, but now there's this formalized thing. And so that leads to the Lysander Cutler Post here in Wausau. Now, who is Lysander Cutler? This is an interesting point. Again, some of the sources like to say that this is a comrade of the soldiers here who fought, but the reality is that, like, because of the nature of our veterans, the people who went off and volunteered or were drafted or whatever, they trickled into the war effort, right? So it's not like they all got, dropped into one, this is this unit of this brigade of this army. Like, they kind of were filling in wherever they were needed. We had people in the Western campaign, the Eastern campaign, people with, the Army of the Potomac and with Sherman's, march to the sea, like everywhere, right? But some of them served with and under Lysander Cutler. A little bit about Cutler. I don't want to get too deep into him because it's an interesting story. But he was born in Maine, the state of Maine. In the 1830s or 40s, he ended up, I think the 30s, I think it's when it happened. There's the Aroostook War, which is the sort of a little brush war that happened between the Maine militia kind of groups, National Guard kind of people, technically the United States versus Canada. I don't bet you didn't know that we went to war with Canada over the northern line of Maine, but we did. Didn't end up becoming like a bloody war or anything. It was very quickly, but he took part in that. He was originally going to be a teacher. He taught for a little while, then got into business. After some financial issues, he ends up moving to Wisconsin, I think in the 1850s, where he is again, a lot of business stuff. He ends up having a very successful grain importing business, I guess. Not importing, just grain produce company. But he also has like mining interests, and he has a company to like secure mining interests out west. So he would go out and, during this period, he was called an Indian fighter, which is one of those where you go, maybe that's not as much of a positive for everybody like it was back in the 1890s and 80s. But we'll skip over that. The war comes. Even though his mining company went bankrupt, he had this grain. He was listed in the 1860 census as a produce dealer. He joins up. He's got military service, and he ends up kind of really finding a place. Like, his experience, he's just perfect as a leader. A lot of acts of bravery. He has like 12 horses shot from underneath him during fighting. He gets grievously wounded and have to like sit out some major battles. They put him back in the field before he's fully recovered. It's a whole, but very well loved. Very, very, he's a guy who could get it done. And that was rare during some of the points of the Civil War. And ultimately, he retired at the end of the war as a brigadier general. And then he died not long after that. That drive, that iron will that he had shown during the conflict, without the war, he kind of just, lost purpose and didn't know what to do. And he just kind of was said to be a broken man. And I believe he had a heart attack or something, complications from his health during the conflict. And he died. And so that's what they named the statue after. This is somebody that they respected. This was pretty common during this period. In fact, if we look at some of the other posts that were established in the regional areas, and for this purpose, Colby is technically in Marathon County, but it's considered to be the Clark County representation. Now, Colby is interesting. I don't know who I.N. Earl is. I was unable to find that. But James Blaine and John Kellogg were both politicians. Blaine from Wisconsin, and I believe Kellogg was from Ohio. Anago actually originally was just post 76, just like Merrill was post 131. But when Kellogg died, they named it after him. So it wasn't uncommon. In fact, most of the posts were named after a figure. And typically, compared to, for example, the American Legion posts that would be established after World War I, those are often named after local figures. Like Montgomery, it was a name of a fallen member of, during World War I, so they named it after him, Montgomery Post. And then later, they added as we went on. Anyway, here, in the GAR, you name it after the more influential people, I guess. But you didn't have to, which is interesting. Anyway, so as I said, WASA had a little chapter post number 83 in 1869. That fizzled out by the 1870s. And then they reestablished itself in 1882, and that's when, not long after this. So what did they do? Well, memorializing the dead was a big thing, and the veterans, remembering the people who gave their service. And not long after they got established, they decided they wanted a statue. And so they went to the county board, and they said, we want to put a statue on the county courthouse grounds. And they said, great. But you raise the money because we don't have money to spend on something like that, and it was going to be expensive. Like I said, $2,000 to $3,000. That's nothing. Not chump change. That's pretty considerable. So it takes about 2 years before they're able to actually commission the statue in 1884, and it takes about a year and a half, 2 years before they finish it. But they do finish it, and it's put onto the grounds of the courthouse, as you can see here from a different courthouse than the one that this is the old courthouse. Not the current one, not the one that was there before that, but the one before that. But yeah, same place as the 400 block, right? That's where the old courthouses used to be. And there it is. And here's where the controversy comes in. When they got ready to actually put it there, they were told, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Some local officials, I don't know if this is a person or a group of people or, I'm not sure exactly who it was that said no. But in the ensuing years, since they got the permission in 1882 to go ahead with this, they decided that this would be inappropriate. It would be inappropriate to have the courthouse be the square, be the home for this statue. And so they wanted it gone. So why? They didn't object to it existing. Let's be clear about that. What they objected to was the proper location for something like that. Their argument was this is a memorial. It's a memorial to the veterans. It's a memorial to the dead. The courthouse is not a public space where you have that sort of veneration. It should be at the cemetery, right? Pine Grove. That's where you have, the big one, of course, is Pine Grove, but there's others. But that's where we have memorials. That's where they're putting on events, This is a stereoscope print of so you kind of hold it up and be a little 3D. But yeah, this is an example here. That should be with the other memorials. That's where we put stuff. But this was a bit of a debate. But ultimately, they didn't get official permission to do this. Obviously, it ended up there, right? Well, it got there because, they finished the base, and they went to deliver it, and they delivered it in the middle of the night. According to the story, right? Delivered it in the middle of the night without checking with anyone first, and they did it on the courthouse grounds. In the morning, when the people showed up and they went, wait, where did that come from? That's not supposed to be here. We told you no. The granite company that made the memorial said, oh, yeah, that's right. Our bad. Whoops. But if you want to move it, go ahead. But we delivered it. You put it where you want it now. And again, this is a 4,500 pound statue. So even without the statue, which was put on the year later, it's going to be considerable to move. And so by that point, it was like, all right, well, I guess it's here now. And that's where it stood. Until, of course, the 1950s, when it did get moved. You can see the statue here, the old courthouse, the newish courthouse, and then the new courthouse that replaced it. When they demolished this building, they made sure to take the statue and the memorials for the soldiers that were on the grounds and moved those too. And I'm not sure exactly when, but they did move them. This is the early 1860s when they were doing road construction, and then you can see it there in the background. So, yeah, that's the statue. Whether it was at the old county courthouse, the older county courthouse, or the current one, it remains a monument to those who served during the conflict of the 1860s, the Great American Civil War. Again, I don't know, especially because it doesn't explicitly say the Civil War. I don't know how many people walk back by this and say, "Oh, that's what that's for." But I know when I see it, I always think about this, about how it was surreptitiously put on the lawn of the courthouse to circumvent this the criticism of where it should go, which is you know, probably not the intention. Oh, certainly not the intention that the GAR had for it, but that's what it became. At least to me, at least, and maybe to you now that you know the story. And of course, it also the other thing is it set a precedent, right? There it is on the courthouse grounds, and oh, what's this? Well, this is another memorial statue. And this happens to be the one that we're going to be talking about next week. Gary Gisselman will be back, and he will be looking at the World War Veterans Memorial that also was placed on the grounds of the county courthouse. A little different connotation, a little different context, I should say. But yeah, there you go. So at this point, that's the presentation. Again, hopefully you come back next week on the 9th. Again, 12:30 as always. We'll do this again. And we'll have a lot more other monumental history to come this month. And again, I'll plug it once again. If you're interested in the GAR, Brett Barker will be talking about it in depth. And he knows his stuff. And he will be taking a look at that. So come back for that as well in September. Okay. So I guess I'll check to see if there's any questions. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat comment section, whatever. I'll give you a minute or so here. I don't know if there are anything I didn't cover here. Just trying to think of did I miss anything? Oh, I guess I could talk a little bit about, again, we'll save the GAR more in depth later. The GAR chapter, for anybody who's wondering, it got started in 1882, right? The new version of it. The Cutler Post eventually disbanded in 1931. And that was when, I even wrote this down. Captain James Young, who was the last surviving veteran, he died in 1931, and so without any members, they closed the chapter, which was pretty typical around that time as the Civil War veterans were dying off. So yeah, awesome. Well, I see some appreciative people posting in Facebook. Thank you, appreciate that. I don't see any questions, so I think maybe we'll call it there. Thanks again for watching. Always appreciate having people makes it worth the time putting into these things to document it. So I appreciate that. And we hope that you will come back next time again for another memorial 12:30 next week. And in the meantime, have a wonderful afternoon and week, and we'll see you next time.